Elijah's heart thundered as he stood in the shadowed foyer of the Whitmore estate, his fingers trembling against the polished banister. The air was thick with the scent of magnolia and old money, but all he could hear was his pulse, drowning out the murmurs from the grand hall. Today was the day the family would gather to honor his grandmother's legacy, and they'd told him to leave Caleb behind. "Don't make a scene," his mother had whispered that morning, her voice sharp as a blade. "This is about respect, Elijah." For her. Respect. The word tasted bitter, like ash on his tongue. Respect meant hiding the man he loved, pretending Caleb was just a friend, a roommate, a nobody. But Caleb was everything: his anchor, his muse, the one who made the world's chaos feel survivable. Elijah tightened his grip on the banister, the wood creaking under his hand. He wasn't sure if he was steadying himself or preparing to run. The Whitmore estate, nestled in the heart of Savannah, Georgia, was a monument to tradition. Its white columns gleamed under the late afternoon sun, and the sprawling gardens whispered of a family that had shaped this town for generations. Elijah had grown up in its shadow, the only child of Margaret Whitmore's youngest daughter, Claire. He'd spent summers running through these halls, sketching the oak trees and dreaming of a life beyond the expectations that clung to him like ivy. But today, at 25, he wasn't a child anymore. He was a man with a secret the family refused to acknowledge, and a boyfriend waiting in their small apartment across town, told to stay away. Elijah. His cousin Amelia's voice cut through his thoughts. She stood at the entrance to the grand hall, her blonde hair pinned in a perfect chignon, her blue eyes narrowing. "You're late. Everyone's waiting." "I'm here," he said, forcing a smile. His sketchpad, tucked under his arm, felt like a shield. He'd brought it to ground himself, to doodle in the margins of this suffocating day. Amelia's gaze flicked to it, her lips pursing. "Don't embarrass us," she said, her voice low. "Not today." Elijah's stomach twisted. "Embarrass us." The words echoed his mother's warning, the same refrain he'd heard since he came out at 17. The Whitmores were pillars of Savannah society, churchgoers, philanthropists, keepers of a legacy that didn't include people like him. Or so they thought. He stepped into the grand hall, where chandeliers glittered and long tables were draped in white linen. 50 relatives filled the room, their faces a mix of forced smiles and guarded glances. At the head of the room stood a portrait of his grandmother, Eleanor Whitmore, her stern eyes watching over them all. She'd passed 6 months ago, leaving a void in the family and a will that had yet to be read. Today's ceremony was meant to celebrate her life, but everyone knew it was really about the money. The Whitmore fortune was vast: land, businesses, investments, and the question of who would inherit it hung like a storm cloud. Elijah took his seat near the back, his mother's icy stare pinning him from across the room. Claire Whitmore was a woman of sharp edges, her auburn hair pulled tight, her posture rigid in her navy dress. She'd always been distant, more concerned with appearances than affection, but her disapproval had sharpened since Elijah brought Caleb to a family dinner 2 years ago. "We don't air our laundry in public," she'd said afterward, as if Caleb were a stain to be scrubbed out. The ceremony began with speeches, Uncle Richard droning about Eleanor's charitable work, Aunt Vivian reminiscing about her garden parties. Elijah's mind drifted to Caleb, who was probably sketching designs for his community theater project, his laughter filling their tiny apartment. Caleb, with his warm brown skin and infectious grin, had a way of making everything brighter. They'd met 3 years ago at an art gallery, where Caleb had been the only one brave enough to critique Elijah's painting. "Bold, but it's hiding something," he'd said, and Elijah had been hooked ever since. "Elijah, are you listening?" His mother's voice snapped him back. She was standing now, holding a glass of champagne, her eyes boring into him. "Sorry," he mumbled, heat creeping up his neck. The room was too warm, the air too heavy. He wanted to be anywhere else back in their apartment, curled up with Caleb, away from these people who saw his love as a scandal. The lawyer, Mr. Hargrove, took the stage, a thin man with a voice like gravel. "We'll now proceed with the reading of Eleanor Whitmore's last will and testament," he announced. The room fell silent, every eye on him. Elijah's pulse quickened. He didn't care about the money, he'd never wanted it, but he knew the will would stir up trouble. His cousins, Amelia and James, were already leaning forward, their faces tight with anticipation. They'd always assumed the fortune would go to them, the respectable heirs. Hargrove cleared his throat. "To my family," he read, "I leave my love and my hope that you will carry forward our legacy with integrity. To my grandchildren Amelia, James, and Elijah I leave the following." Elijah tuned out, his fingers tracing the edge of his sketchpad. He didn't expect anything. His grandmother had been kind but distant, a product of her time. She'd never acknowledged his relationship with Caleb, though she'd once told him, "You have a good heart, Elijah. Don't let anyone dim it." He'd clung to those words, even as the family tried to dim him. And to Elijah Whitmore, Hargrove's voice cut through. "I bequeath the entirety of the Whitmore estate, including all properties, businesses, and financial holdings, to be managed as he sees fit." The room froze. Elijah's breath caught, his heart slamming against his ribs. Heads turned, eyes wide with shock. Amelia's champagne glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. Claire's face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "What?" James spat, his voice slicing through the silence. "That's impossible." Hargrove held up a hand. "There's more." Mrs. Whitmore included a personal letter to Elijah, to be read privately after this ceremony. Elijah couldn't move. The estate. The fortune. Him. It didn't make sense. He was the outcast, the one they'd told to hide his boyfriend, to stay quiet, to not make waves. Why would his grandmother choose him? Amelia was on her feet now, her face red. "This is a mistake." She's not even, she stopped, but the unspoken words hung in the air. Not even straight. Not even worthy. Enough. Hargrove's voice was firm. "The will is legally binding. We'll discuss details after the ceremony." The room erupted into whispers, accusations, glares. Elijah felt their eyes on him, sharp as knives. His mother was staring at the floor, her hands clenched. He wanted to run, to find Caleb, to make sense of this. But he stayed, rooted to his chair, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. As the ceremony ended, relatives swarmed him, their voices a cacophony of anger and disbelief. "You manipulated her," James hissed. "You don't deserve this." Amelia's eyes were wet with tears, her voice shaking. "This was supposed to be ours." Elijah slipped away, clutching his sketchpad, and found Hargrove in a quiet corner. The lawyer handed him a sealed envelope, his grandmother's elegant handwriting on the front, for Elijah. She was very clear about her wishes. Hargrove said softly, "Read it alone." Elijah nodded, his throat tight. He stepped outside, the humid savanna air wrapping around him. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. He tore open the envelope, his hands shaking. "My dearest Elijah," the letter began, You've always seen the world differently, with a heart that loves fiercely and a soul that creates beauty. I've watched you struggle, watched this family fail you. But I see you. I've always seen you. Tears blurred his vision. He read on, her words weaving a story of a woman who'd loved him in silence, who'd admired his courage, who'd chosen him not despite who he was, but because of it. Elijah stood frozen on the veranda, the letter trembling in his hands. His grandmother's words were a lifeline, pulling him from the chaos of the ceremony. But they also burned with questions. Why hadn't she told him? Why had she let him believe she was just another silent judge in a family that demanded he shrink himself? The letter continued, the Whitmore legacy is not just land or money, it's the power to change things. I've seen how you love, Elijah, how you fight for what's right. This family needs you to lead it into a new era, one of acceptance and truth. I trust you to do what I could not. He folded the letter, pressing it to his chest. The weight of her trust was overwhelming, but it also sparked something fierce in him, a resolve he hadn't known he possessed. He wasn't just the black sheep anymore. He was the heir, and that meant he could rewrite the rules. But first, he needed Caleb. He pulled out his phone, his fingers fumbling as he dialed. Caleb, he said when the call connected, his voice breaking. I need you here. Eli, what's wrong? Caleb's voice was warm, steady, a balm to Elijah's frayed nerves. Are you okay? They named me the heir. The whole estate. Everything. The words felt surreal, like they belonged to someone else's life. There was a pause, then Caleb's soft laugh. Holy shit. Eli. Wow. I'm coming. Where are you? The estate. Hurry. And Caleb. Elijah's voice dropped. I don't care what they say. I need you with me. I'm already out the door, Caleb said, and Elijah could hear the jingle of keys, the slam of their apartment door. 10 minutes. Elijah hung up, his heart racing. He glanced back at the mansion, where shadows moved behind the windows. The family was still inside, plotting, scheming, tearing apart his grandmother's decision. He could feel their resentment like a storm brewing, but for the first time, he didn't feel small. He felt powerful. He slipped the letter into his pocket and headed back inside, steeling himself. The grand hall was quieter now, but the tension was palpable. Amelia and James were huddled with their parents, whispering furiously. His mother stood alone by the portrait of Eleanor, her face unreadable. When she saw Elijah, she crossed the room, her heels clicking on the hardwood. Elijah, she said, her voice low, controlled. We need to talk. Not now, he said, surprised by the firmness in his own voice. I'm waiting for Caleb. Her eyes widened, a flash of panic crossing her face. You can't be serious. Not here. Not after this. Especially after this, he said, holding her gaze. He's my partner, Mom. And I'm done hiding him. Claire's lips pressed into a thin line, but before she could respond, the front door opened. Caleb stepped inside, his presence like a burst of sunlight in the dim hall. He wore a simple button-down and jeans, his dark curls slightly mussed from the drive. But to Elijah, he looked like a hero. Caleb's eyes found him immediately, and he crossed the room in long strides, ignoring the stares. Hey, Caleb said, his hand finding Elijah's. You okay? Elijah nodded, squeezing his hand. Better now. The room seemed to hold its breath. Amelia's gasp was audible, and James's face twisted in disgust. Claire stepped back, her expression a mix of shock and shame. But Elijah didn't care. Caleb's hand in his was a declaration, a line drawn in the sand. "Elijah," Claire said, her voice shaking. "This is not the time." "It's exactly the time," he said, his voice steady. "Grandma chose me. And I choose Caleb." The words hung in the air, a challenge to everyone in the room. Caleb's grip tightened, his thumb brushing Elijah's knuckles. For a moment, it was just them two men standing together in a room full of judgment, their love a quiet act of defiance. Hargrove approached, his expression neutral. "Elijah, perhaps we should discuss the details of the inheritance privately." "No," Elijah said, surprising himself again. "Anything you say to me, you can say in front of Caleb." Hargrove hesitated, then nodded. "Very well. The estate includes the mansion, 3 commercial properties in downtown Savannah, and a trust fund valued at approximately $50 million. There are also stipulations your grandmother wanted you to oversee the Whitmore Foundation, with a focus on community outreach." Elijah's mind reeled. $50 million. The foundation. It was more than he'd ever imagined. But it was the last part that hit him hardest: community outreach. His grandmother had known about his work with local art programs, his dreams of creating spaces for kids like him, kids who felt like they didn't belong. She'd been paying attention. Amelia stepped forward, her voice shrill. "This is absurd. He's going to ruin everything." "Grandma would never." "She did," Hargrove interrupted, his tone final. "And she left explicit instructions that Elijah is to have full control." The room erupted again, voices overlapping in a cacophony of outrage. Elijah felt Caleb's arm slip around his waist, grounding him. He looked at his mother, expecting another lecture, but she was silent, her eyes fixed on the portrait of Eleanor. For the first time, Elijah saw something like doubt in her expression. "Let's get out of here," Caleb whispered. "You don't need to deal with this now." Elijah nodded, but before they could leave, James blocked their path. "You think you can just waltz in here and take everything?" He spat. "This isn't over, Elijah. We'll fight this." "Try," Elijah said, his voice calm but unyielding. But this is what she wanted. He and Caleb walked out, hand in hand, into the twilight. The air was warm, the crickets beginning to sing. Elijah felt the weight of the letter in his pocket, the weight of his grandmother's trust, and the weight of Caleb's love beside him. For the first time in years, he felt like he could breathe. But as they reached Caleb's car, Elijah's phone buzzed. A text from Amelia. "You'll regret this." "We're not done." The drive back to their apartment was quiet, the hum of Caleb's old Honda the only sound between them. Elijah stared out the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and red. Amelia's text burned in his mind, a promise of trouble he wasn't ready to face. But Caleb's hand on his knee, warm and steady, kept him grounded. "You were incredible back there," Caleb said, glancing over with a small smile. "Standing up to them like that. That's my Eli." Elijah managed a weak laugh. "I don't feel incredible. I feel like I just started a war." "Maybe you did," Caleb said, his voice gentle. "But it's a war worth fighting. Your grandma saw something in you. So do I." Elijah leaned his head against the window, the letter's words echoing in his mind. "I've seen how you love, Elijah, how you fight for what's right." He wanted to believe her, to believe he could carry this burden. But the family's anger, Their refusal to accept him felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. Back at their apartment, a cozy one-bedroom filled with art supplies and second-hand furniture, Elijah collapsed onto the couch. Caleb sat beside him, pulling him close. "Talk to me," he said. "What's going on in that head of yours?" "I don't know how to do this," Elijah admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "The money, the estate, the foundation, it's too much. And they hate me for it. They've always hated me." "Not always," Caleb said, brushing a strand of hair from Elijah's face. "Your grandma didn't. And I sure as hell don't." Elijah smiled despite himself, leaning into Caleb's touch. "What if I screw this up? What if I can't be what she wanted?" "You won't," Caleb said firmly. "You're already more than they give you credit for. And you're not alone in this. I'm right here." Elijah kissed him, soft and slow, letting the warmth of Caleb's lips chase away the doubt. For a moment, it was just them, the world outside fading away. But reality crept back in, and Elijah pulled away, his mind racing. "I need to read the rest of her letter," he said, pulling it from his pocket. "There's more she didn't say in front of everyone." Caleb nodded, squeezing his hand. "I'll make coffee." "You read?" Elijah unfolded the letter, his grandmother's handwriting steady and sure. "There's something else you need to know," she wrote. "The Whitmore Foundation has a project I started in Secreta Community Center for young people, especially those who feel they don't belong. I've seen the work you do, Elijah, the way you mentor kids through your art classes. This center is for them, and I want you to lead it. The family will fight you, but don't let them win. They're afraid of change, but you're not." Tears pricked Elijah's eyes. A community center. A place for kids like him, kids who felt like outsiders, who needed a safe space to be themselves. It was everything he'd ever dreamed of, wrapped in his grandmother's faith in him. Caleb returned with 2 mugs of coffee, setting one beside Elijah. "What's it say?" "She left me a project," Elijah said, his voice thick. "A community center. For kids who need it. She wants me to run it." Caleb's face lit up. "That's perfect. That's you, Eli. You're already doing this kind of work." "But the family," Elijah said, his voice faltering. "They'll try to stop it. Amelia's already texting threats." "Let them try," Caleb said, his eyes fierce. "This is your chance to do something real. Something that matters." Elijah nodded, but the weight of it all pressed down on him. He spent the night poring over the letter, memorizing every word, while Caleb sketched designs for the community center, his pencil flying across the page. By morning, they had a planner, at least the start of one. They'd visit the foundation's office, meet with the board, and see what they were up against. The next day, they drove to the Whitmore Foundation's headquarters, a sleek building in downtown Savannah. The boardroom was all glass and polished wood, a stark contrast to the old money charm of the estate. The board members, a mix of older men and women handpicked by Eleanor, greeted Elijah with polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "Mr. Whitmore," the chairwoman, Mrs. Langley, said, her voice clipped. "We were surprised by your grandmother's decision, but we're prepared to work with you." Elijah nodded, his sketchpad under his arm. "I want to focus on the community center she mentioned in her letter. It's important to me." Mrs. Langley's smile tightened. "The center is a pet project, but it's not a priority. The foundation's funds are tied up in other initiatives, real estate, scholarships, Traditional charities. Traditional, Elijah repeated, his voice sharp. You mean the kind that don't make waves? Her eyes narrowed. We mean the kind that align with the Whitmore legacy. Caleb, seated beside him, leaned forward. Elijah is the legacy now. And he's got a vision for that center. You should hear him out. The room went quiet. Mrs. Langley glanced at Caleb, her expression unreadable. And you are? His partner, Caleb said, unflinching. And I'm here to support him. Elijah's chest swelled with pride. He opened his sketchpad, pulling out drawings he'd made for the center bright. Open spaces filled with art, music, and community. This is what my grandmother wanted, he said, passing the sketches around. A place for kids who feel like they don't belong. A place where they can be themselves. Some board members nodded. Others looked skeptical. Mrs. Langley folded her hands. We'll need to review the financials. This is a significant shift. As the meeting ended, Elijah felt a mix of hope and dread. The board wasn't fully on his side, and the family's threats loomed large. That night, another text came, this time from James. We're contesting the will. You won't get away with this. Elijah stared at James's text, his stomach churning. Contesting the will. It wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of war. He showed the message to Caleb, who read it with a frown. They're scared, Caleb said, tossing the phone onto the couch. They know they can't control you, so they're lashing out. But what if they win? Elijah asked, his voice small. What if they take it all away? Caleb pulled him close, his arms strong and sure. They won't. Your grandma's will is ironclad. And even if they try, we'll fight. Together. Elijah nodded, but the fear lingered. Over the next week, he threw himself into the community center plans, meeting with architects and community leaders, sketching designs late into the night. Caleb was by his side, brainstorming ideas and keeping him grounded. They envisioned a space with art studios, a theater, a library, everything a kid might need to feel seen. But every step forward came with resistance. The board dragged their feet, citing budget concerns. Anonymous letters arrived at the foundation, questioning Elijah's fitness to lead. And the family's whispers grew louder, their accusations sharper. One evening, Elijah and Caleb were at a local diner, going over blueprints, when Amelia walked in. She spotted them and strode over, her face a mask of fury. You're destroying everything, she said, her voice low but venomous. Grandma's legacy, our family's name, all for what? To push your agenda. Elijah's hands clenched under the table. It's not an agenda, Amelia. It's who I am. And it's what Grandma wanted. She was old, Amelia snapped. Confused. You took advantage of her. Caleb leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. You don't get to rewrite her intentions just because you don't like them. She chose Elijah for a reason. Amelia's eyes flashed. You don't belong here, she said to Caleb, her words dripping with disdain. This is a family matter. He's my family, Elijah said, standing. And if you can't handle that, maybe you're the one who doesn't belong. Amelia flinched, then turned and stormed out. Elijah sank back into his seat, his heart pounding. Caleb reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining. You're getting stronger, Caleb said, a proud smile tugging at his lips. She didn't know what hit her. Elijah laughed, but it was shaky. I'm terrified. Caleb. What if they're right? What if I'm not enough? You are, Caleb said, his voice fierce. You're enough for me. For those kids. For this whole damn town if you want to be. The next day, Elijah received a call from Hargrove. The families filed a formal challenge to the will. He said, they're claiming undue influence. There's a hearing in 2 weeks. Elijah's heart sank. He'd known it was coming, but the reality hit hard. He and Caleb spent the evening researching legal options, reaching out to allies in the community. The local art scene rallied around them, offering support and resources. A young lawyer, Mia, who'd grown up in one of Elijah's art classes, volunteered to help. This is personal for me, she said. You gave me a place to belong. Now it's my turn to fight for you. The hearing loomed like a dark cloud, but Elijah refused to back down. He and Caleb visited the site of the proposed community center, a vacant lot near the river. Standing there, Elijah could see the laughter of kids, the hum of creativity, the promise of a better future. This is why we're fighting, he said, his voice steady. For them. Caleb nodded, his eyes shining. For us, too. But the family's attacks grew uglier. A local gossip blog published a story about Elijah, painting him as a reckless outsider who'd tricked his grandmother. Anonymous calls flooded the foundation, demanding Elijah step down. One night, someone slashed the tires of Caleb's car, leaving a note, "Leave Savannah." Elijah's resolve wavered. Maybe they're right, he said, staring at the note. Maybe I'm tearing everything apart. Caleb grabbed his shoulders, his eyes fierce. You're building something better. Don't let them make you doubt that. Elijah nodded, but the weight of it all was crushing. The night before the hearing, he couldn't sleep. He sat at their kitchen table, sketching the community center, pouring his fears into every line. Caleb found him there at dawn, wrapping his arms around him. We've got this, Caleb said. No matter what happens tomorrow, we've got each other. Elijah clung to him, drawing strength from his warmth. He didn't know what the hearing would bring, but he knew he wouldn't face it alone. The courtroom was a sea of stern faces and whispered judgments. Elijah sat at the plaintiff's table, Caleb beside him, their hands clasped under the table. Mia, their lawyer, stood ready, her notes meticulously prepared. Across the room, Amelia, James, and Claire sat with their attorney, a slick man named Peterson who radiated confidence. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, called the room to order. Elijah's heart pounded as Peterson presented the family's case, painting him as an opportunist who'd manipulated a frail old woman. Elijah Whitmore has no experience managing a fortune of this magnitude, Peterson said, his voice smooth. His lifestyle choices raise questions about his ability to uphold the Whitmore legacy. Elijah's face burned, but Caleb's grip on his hand kept him steady. Mia stood, her voice clear and unwavering. Eleanor Whitmore was of sound mind when she drafted her will, she said. She chose Elijah because of his character, his vision, and his commitment to community. This challenge is nothing more than prejudice dressed up as concern. The hearing stretched on, with witnesses from the family testifying about Elijah's unfitness. Amelia's voice shook as she claimed Elijah had distanced himself from the family, implying his relationship with Caleb was a betrayal. Claire, when called, spoke softly, her eyes avoiding Elijah's. I just want what's best for the family, she said, but her words felt hollow. Then it was Elijah's turn. He took the stand, his sketchpad in hand, his grandmother's letter tucked in his pocket. I didn't ask for this, he said, his voice steady despite the knot in his chest. I didn't expect it. But my grandmother believed in me. She saw the work I do with kids, the art programs I run, the dreams I have for a community center where everyone is welcome. She chose me because she knew I'd fight for what's right, not just what's easy. He held up a sketch of the center, its vibrant colors a stark contrast to the courtroom's gray walls. This is what she wanted. A place for people to belong. And I won't let fear or hatred stop me from making it real. Caleb's proud smile from the gallery gave Elijah the strength to keep going. He spoke about his grandmother's letter, her quiet support, her vision for change. When he finished, the room was silent, the judge's expression unreadable. The family's attorney called one final witness, an old friend of Eleanor's who claimed she'd expressed doubts about Elijah. But Mia was ready, presenting a video Eleanor had recorded a year before her death. In it, she spoke directly to the camera, her voice firm. Elijah is my choice, she said. He has the heart to lead this family forward. Don't let your fear stop him. The courtroom buzzed, the family's confidence faltering. The judge adjourned for deliberation, and Elijah felt a flicker of hope. Outside, he and Caleb leaned against the courthouse steps, the Savannah sun warm on their faces. Whatever happens, Caleb said, you did her proud. The judge's ruling came swiftly. The will stands, she declared. Elijah Whitmore is the rightful heir, and the Whitmore Foundation is under his control. Amelia burst into tears. James stormed out, and Claire sat frozen, her face pale. Elijah felt no triumph, only relief. He and Caleb left the courthouse hand in hand, the weight of the victory settling over them. In the months that followed, Elijah poured himself into the community center. The lot by the river transformed into a vibrant space, with art studios, a theater, and a garden where kids could plant flowers. The opening day was a celebration, with music and laughter filling the air. Caleb stood beside him, cutting the ribbon, their hands together on the scissors. Claire came to the opening, standing quietly at the back. After, she approached Elijah, her eyes soft. I was wrong, she said. About you. About Caleb. I'm trying to understand. Elijah nodded, his throat tight. That's a start. The center became a beacon in Savannah, a place where kids of all backgrounds could be themselves. Elijah and Caleb mentored them, taught classes, and watched them grow. The family's anger faded, some even volunteering at the center, drawn by its light. One evening, as the sun set over the river, Elijah and Caleb sat on the center steps, watching kids play in the garden. We did it, Elijah said, his voice full of wonder. You did it, Caleb corrected, kissing his temple. And your grandma's smiling somewhere. Elijah looked at the sky, the stars beginning to emerge. He felt his grandmother's love, his own strength, and Caleb's unwavering support. The Whitmore legacy wasn't just money or land, it was this. A place of acceptance, built on love, standing tall against the storms of the past.